The first topic in this video is NX OS supported platforms. NX OS data center class operating system designed for maximum scalability and application availability has a wide variety of platform support include the following: Nexus 9000, Nexus 7000, Nexus 6000, Nexus 5000, Nexus 4000, Nexus 3000, Nexus 2000, and Nexus 1000V, Cisco MDS 9000, and Cisco Unified Computing System or UCS. In this figure you can see some of them, but we will learn about some of them more than now in future. For example, here you can see Cisco Nexus 9000 and also the Cisco Nexus 7000 family, Cisco Nexus 5000 family, Cisco Nexus 3000 and 2000 family, and also the other models. We will learn about some of them in future a little more. Alright, the next topic in this video is Cisco NX OS and Cisco IOS comparison. If you are familiar with traditional Cisco IOS command line interface or CLI, the CLI for NX OS is similar to Cisco IOS. There are key differences that should be understood prior to working with NX OS, however. When you first log into NX OS, you go directly into exec mode. Let me to show you. As you can see, when I entered to the Nexus switch, this is the first mode I can see, the actually exec mode or privilege exec mode. NX OS has a setup utility that enables a user to specify the system default, perform basic configuration, and apply a predefined control plane policy or COPP or COP security policy. Also, NX OS uses a feature-based license model. An enterprise or advanced services license is required depending on the feature required. For example, if you want to enable OSPF, if you use router OSPF 1, okay, as you can see, the router OSPF 1 is not available. First, we need to enable it with feature OSPF command. After this command, if your license support this feature, okay, you can enable the router OSPF. Let me to show you here, router, okay, router OSPF and then 1. That's it, okay. Actually, let me to repeat, NX OS uses a feature-based license model. Okay, and then as I mentioned in the previous video, a 120-day license grace period is supported for testing, but features are automatically removed from the configuration after the expiration date is reached. NX OS has the capability to enable and disable features such as OSPF, BGP, and so on with the feature command as I showed you, and configuration and verification commands are not available until you enable the specific feature. For example, as I mentioned before, here now you can use show IP OSPF, for example, interface, show IP OSPF interface command, because we enabled the actually OSPF previously, but with feature OSPF command. But if you use show IP BGP summary, as you can see, this command is not available. Why? Because we didn't enable BGP previously. First, we need to use feature and then BGP. After enabling the feature BGP, you can use show IP BGP summary command. Okay, but you know that I didn't configure BGP until now. After that, interfaces are labeled in the configuration as Ethernet. Look at here. If you check show running config, you will see in running config we have interface Ethernet, not fast Ethernet, not gigabit Ethernet or 10 gigabit Ethernet or more. Okay, actually interfaces are labeled in the configuration as Ethernet. There aren't any speed designation in the interface name. Interface speed is dynamically learned and reflected in the appropriate show command and interface metrics. For example, show interface Ethernet and then to 1 can show us that this interface is 1 gigabit per second interface. Okay, it is obvious. And after that, NX OS support virtual device context or VDC, as I mentioned in the previous video, which enables a physical device to be partitioned into logical devices. When you log in for the first time, you are in the default VDC. Don't worry about the detail of VDC, only I want to explain about the Cisco NX OS and the differences between this version of OS with Cisco iOS. But you should know that NX OS support virtual device context or VDC, and we are by default in the default VDC. Also, the Cisco NX OS has two pre-configured instances of VRF routing forwarding or VRF by default. First, management and then default. Okay, by default, all layer 3 interfaces and routing protocols exist in the default VRF. Okay, here in the switch, okay, we can use show IP route, or as you can see, we are in the default VRF. This is the default status. But the management 0 or MGMT 0 interface exists in the management VRF and is accessible from any VDC. If VDCs are configured, each VDC has a unique IP address for the management interface. Let me to review it. By default, actually, without defining any VRF, we have two VRF, show IP VRF command or show VRF. Look at here, we have two VRF, default and also management. Okay, as you can see, and I showed you, when you use show IP route, you can see the default VRF. This is like the global VRF in the iOS. Actually, all interfaces except management 0 or MGMT 0 are members of the default VRF by default. Okay, but management interface is the member of the management VRF. Okay, or MGMT 0 is the member of the management interface. Okay, actually the management VRF, the MGMT 0 interface exists in the management VRF and is accessible from any VDC. If VDC are configured, each VDC has a unique IP address for the MGMT 0 interfaces. You will learn more than this about them in future. The next differences is Secure Shell version 2 or SSH version 2 is enabled by default. Telnet is disabled by default. And then default login administrator user is predefined as admin. A password has to be specified when the system is first powered up. With NX OS, you must enter a username and password. You cannot disable the username and password login. In contrast, in iOS, you can simply type a password and you can optionally set the login to require the use of a username. And after that, NX OS uses a kickstart image and a system image. Both images are identified in the configuration file as the kickstart and system boot variables. This is the same as the Cisco multi-layer director switch or MDS fiber channel switches running SAN OS. Don't worry about the detail of this item. After that, NX OS removed the write memory command, use the copy running config startup config. There is also the alias command syntax. Let me to show you. This is our switch here. In this switch, we don't have write memory command. Look at here, write memory is not available. But you can use copy, okay, running config to startup config, okay. This is actually the method of saving configuration in NX OS. After that, the default spanning tree mode in NX OS is rapid PVST plus. Show a spanning tree, because here we don't have any network, we don't have a spanning tree instance, but the default spanning tree mode in NX OS is rapid PVST. In iOS, in most cases, the default is PVST. And in NX OS, you have to enable features such as OSPF, BGP, and CTS. If you remove a feature via no feature command, all relevant comments related to that feature are removed from the running configuration. Let me to show you. Here we configured the OSPF previously, show running config. Okay, here you can see that we have feature OSPF, and also we have the configuration of the OSPF at the end of our configuration, auto OSPF form, for example. Now let me to remove the feature OSPF, no feature, and then OSPF. Okay, after that you will see that in running config we don't have any configuration related to the OSPF. Okay, automatically they are removed. For example, when configuring VTY timeouts and session limits, okay, consider this example, which illustrates the differences between iOS and NXOS syntax. As you can see here, we have VTY configuration and session limits comparing the differences between traditional iOS and NXOS. In traditional iOS, we configure line VTY, for example, 0 to 9, exec timeout 15 minutes and 0 seconds, and then login, copy running config startup config. In NXOS, we configure line VTY, session limit 10, exec timeout, for example, 15 minutes, and then copy running config to startup config. You will learn about all of these details in this course. Actually, we will learn about NXOS modes and how we can configure different features. Here, we are reviewing, or we are comparing Cisco NXOS and Cisco IOS with each other.